Look at almost any mirror painted before the year 1500. It isn't silver, it's black. And in more than one of these paintings, what's showing inside that black circle is not the room it's hanging in. A modern artist paints a mirror the way a mirror behaves. It picks up the colors around it, it throws back whatever stands in front of it. But go back 500–600 years, and the mirrors in these paintings are dark discs, sometimes almost pure black. And they're not tucked away in a corner as a bit of furniture. They're given carved frames, gold surrounds, ribbons with Latin written across them. They're held like something precious. In one painting, a man points at one the way you'd point at an announcement. Whatever these objects were to the people who painted them, they mattered. So the question is simple enough to ask and much harder to answer. Why black? And why does the picture inside sometimes belong somewhere else entirely? Quick pause before we go looking. If you keep coming back to this channel, thank you. That means more than you'd think. If you're new, a subscribe and a like help a channel like this more than almost anything else. And one honest note. What follows is the best I've been able to piece together from the paintings themselves and the record around them. If it clashes with what you know, no hard feelings. None of this is the last word, and the picture can change the moment better evidence turns up. It's a painting from 1449, a goldsmith in a shop. He sits in a deep red robe behind a wooden counter, holding a small brass scale. Beside him stand a couple, clearly there to buy. The woman in heavy gold brocade with a tall white headdress, the man behind her in black, one hand resting on her shoulder. Behind them, the shelves are loaded. Crystal flasks, strings of coral and beads, rings laid out in little boxes, a lump of raw stone. Every object is painted with the kind of attention that says the artist wanted you to be able to count them. And then, on the front corner of the counter, tipped up towards us, there's a round convex mirror. Inside it is a street. Not the shop, not the goldsmith, not the couple, not the shelves. A street of tall stepped houses under an open sky, and standing in it, two men. One in a red coat with a black hat, one leaning in beside him. They're cut off at the waist by the curve of the glass, as if the mirror were mounted high on something and angled downward to take in the whole road. Nothing anywhere in that shop appears in it. Now hold that image, because once you've seen it, you start seeing the same thing everywhere. Because this is not one strange painting, it's a pattern, and it runs for centuries. There's a manuscript illustration where a man in red sits in a carved throne, children gathered in front of him, and he's pointing deliberately with one finger at a black disc set upright on a golden stand. It's mounted like a monstrance, the kind of stand you'd put something holy in. The disc itself is flat, dark, and empty. There's a panel where a woman leans a large convex mirror against a table, her hand curled over the rim. The glass is almost entirely dark, with one hard white glint on it, like light-off wet stone. There's another where a black oval hangs on a patterned wall in an ornate silver frame with a tassel underneath it, while two figures in the background look up in its direction. There's a portrait of a lady in a stiff lace collar, and pinned to her dress is a small octagonal pendant, enameled, jeweled, and in the middle of it, a dark, polished eye. Different countries, different centuries, different artists who never met, and the same object keeps appearing, treated the same way, dark, framed, and important. In one painting, it even carries a written label, a banderole curling around it with two Latin words, Speculum sine macula, the mirror without blemish. That name turns out to matter a great deal. But before the name, there's a plainer question to clear up. Why paint a mirror black at all? For most of European history, a mirror was nothing like a sheet of glass on your bathroom wall. It was polished metal, steel, bronze, sometimes silver, and metal tarnishes. It goes gray, then brown, then dark. Or it was a small piece of blown glass, curved outward and backed with lead, which gave you a dim, murky little picture with hardly any brightness in it. The flat, brilliant silvered mirror we take for granted came later, out of the glass workshops of Venice, and when it arrived, it was so expensive that owning a large one was a way of announcing you were rich. So when a painter in 1450 painted a mirror as a dark disc, he may have simply been painting what a mirror actually looked like. That's fair, and it's true, but notice what it doesn't touch. It explains why the surface is dark. It doesn't explain why the goldsmith's mirror is showing a street he isn't standing in. And it doesn't explain why an object that dim and that limited kept getting the gold frame, the sacred stand, and a Latin motto written across it. For that, you have to look at what these people believed a mirror was for. Speculum sine macula, the mirror without stain, was a sacred title. It belonged to the Virgin Mary, one of a whole set of emblems used to describe her. The gate of heaven, the sealed fountain, the tower, the enclosed garden, the star of the sea. In those paintings, the dark orb isn't furniture at all. It's a symbol of something perfect and unclouded. Which sounds like it settles the matter, until you follow the idea one step further into the single most famous line ever written about mirrors. Now we see through a glass darkly. It's one of those phrases that's drifted into ordinary speech, but the older Latin is stranger and sharper than the English lets on. Videmus nunc per speculum in enigmate. We see now through a mirror, in a riddle, in an enigma. Sit with what that means. In this tradition, a mirror is not a thing that shows you yourself. A mirror is a dark surface that shows you something true but veiled. A message you have to work to read, arriving from somewhere beyond the room you're standing in. That is a very specific idea about what a black mirror does, and it's not a modern theory laid over old art. It's the words on the paintings actually say. So if that's what people believe these objects were, did anyone ever try to use one that way? They did, and the names are not obscure ones. John Dee was an advisor at the court of Queen Elizabeth I, a mathematician, an astronomer, one of the most educated men in England. He owned the Black Mirror, a disc of polished obsidian, dark as a pool of ink, with a small handle at the top. And he used it. He and his associate would sit with that mirror and attempt to see places they could not travel to, and to receive information from something they believed was on the other side of it. Dee kept records of these sessions in enormous detail. The mirror itself still exists. You can go and stand in front of it in a museum in London. And the object has a history before him that's stranger still. It came out of Mexico, from the Aztec world, where polished obsidian mirrors were made and used for exactly this purpose. Their god of rulership and hidden knowledge carried a name that translates directly as smoking mirror, a being set to watch the world through a dark, polished surface and see everything happening in it. Two civilizations, an ocean apart, with no contact between them, both grinding black stone into discs, both convinced that if you looked into one correctly, you would see something happening somewhere else. There's a print in this same tradition showing a queen and an astrologer standing before a mirror above a fireplace, figures with crowns moving inside the glass, a scene the queen herself was said to have been shown, and another old engraving of a scholar in his study, being shown a woman's face in a floating oval, an image a caption on the print once described as a prediction of television centuries early. Which brings us to the theory this all points toward. According to one reading of all this, the Black Mirror was never a mirror at all. It was one half of a pair. The dark one, so the theory goes, was the eye, hung somewhere out in the world, on a wall, in a street, above a doorway. And the clear one was the window, kept somewhere private by someone who wanted to see. Look into the bright one and you'd see whatever the dark one was looking at. The suggestion goes further, that if you stood on the black side, you might catch the faintest impression of someone on the other end looking back at you. It's a bold idea, and I want to be straight about what stands against it. A convex mirror has an enormously wide field of view. Curve the glass and it will pick up a whole street through a shop door, at angles that feel impossible until you hold one. Painters of that period loved that trick precisely because it let them show you what was outside the frame. In one of the most famous paintings of the entire era, the mirror on the back wall reveals two extra figures standing in a doorway you can't otherwise see, and the artist signed the wall above it with a line meaning he was here. That's a deliberate game with space, played by people who were extremely good at it. So the geometry has an answer. What it doesn't answer is the choice. Why does this one object, out of everything in the room, keep getting the gold frame and the sacred stand and the Latin motto? Why did a scholar in London and the priesthood in Mexico, who never knew the other existed, both reach for the same black stone when they wanted to see something far away? Strip it back, and one idea holds the whole thing together. For most of recorded history, a dark, polished surface was not understood as something that shows you your own face. It was understood as something that shows you elsewhere. That belief was serious, it was widespread, and it was held by people who were anything but simple. Whether any of it ever worked is a question I can't close, and I'd rather say so than pretend. What I keep turning over is this. We spend our evenings now staring into black glass that shows us places we aren't, and we gave it a name without thinking twice. So how strange is it, really, that they were doing the same thing 500 years ago?